There was once a young man who got out of high school and was wondering what to do with the rest of his life ahead of him. And he looked around at various occupations and careers and employments. And he thought it might be wise to do something that he enjoyed doing. So he looked inside himself and he said, well, I enjoy music. I like music. Maybe I could become a professional musician. But it was just a vague thought, so he thought he'd think about it for a little bit and investigate the world of music. And he was astonished and interested to find the hundreds of varieties of music. For example, there was jazz, and there was ragtime, and there was Dixieland, and there was opera music, and there was patriotic songs and religious music, and there were brass bands and string quartets. But it fascinated him. He liked music. So he said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a professional musician. And I think I'll play the accordion. I like the accordion. So he bought an accordion and practiced at night when he came home from work. He practiced and he watched other performers and became quite proficient musician. And then he started getting small little professional engagements, small little places where he'd play for the evening. Some place he'd play free. Very often he'd play for free just to get experience. But he had a unique touch about him. He could play the accordion way above average so that people noticed it and they appreciated it. And he liked the feeling of it, kind of music he liked to play. He liked what he was doing. So he advanced in his professional career week by week, month by month. Finally, he was playing at big fairs and large parties and with orchestras as a featured soloist. So he was quite pleased with what he was doing. But one thing he enjoyed most of all was to play the kind of music that he liked to play. Because when he had first searched out the world of music and he saw that there's all the Dixieland and all the religious music and all the varieties of music, he said, there's one type of music that I like best, and that is simply pleasant, sweet music with a melody that doesn't offend the ears, that kind of music is natural to my nature. That's what I like to play. And he said, for example, the waltz is a perfect example of the kind of music I like to play. So he became an expert on playing waltzes on the accordion. That became his trademark. And people recognized his skill at it and expected him to play waltzes. So time went on, and one day he was sitting at home, and he got a telephone call. And when the caller introduced himself, he was a little bit astonished. He thought it might have been a joke at first, but it wasn't. The voice said, "This is Governor Smith." And his ears picked up, "This is the governor of the state calling me. I wonder what the governor could want." And the governor said, "I've personally selected your name to be the featured soloist at our annual dance festival." And the young musician, he knew what that was. The annual dance festival was at the state fair where they had enormous acres of flat grass where hundreds of dancers would come out as part of the overall festivities with banquets. There's lots of dancing out on this block long, longer than that, grass. And the musicians would be up on the platform at one end, of course, with their microphones, which would go all over, and the musicians would stand up there and play, and all the dancers would dance. So he was so delighted, of course, that the governor had asked him to be the featured soloist at the dance. So the time came, and as he got up there, he could just see his career doubling and tripling, his money-making capacity from it growing, and the fame, why there were tens of thousands of people coming in and out, dancing and seeing him. And he was the featured soloist. Came the first day of the dance and banquet. So he got up on the platform and started to play the accordion. And he played a pretty waltz. Everyone applauded politely at the end. He took a little rest. Time for him to play again. He played another pretty waltz. Applauded him again. Sat down. This went on for 2 or 3 hours. He played his nice, pretty waltzes on the accordion, and everyone seemed to appreciate it. When he got up for about the 5th time, after he was getting up to play, to start his own preferred kind of music, he noticed a little restlessness out there in the crowd, especially those that were closer to him. And someone yelled out, "No more waltzes. Play us some Dixieland or play us some jazz or something." And that's the first time he'd ever encountered opposition to the kind of music that he wanted to play, which was a pretty soothing waltz. So he didn't quite know how to answer. So instead of answering, he just did his best to play the kind of music they wanted him to play. And for the first time, he ceased to enjoy music. For the first time, he sensed a difference inside of him in which he knew that something was wrong, but he couldn't quite figure it out. So this went on for the whole day, and people kept yelling out their ridiculous titles, the Froggy, Hop, Wiggle song. So that's what they asked for. So he played the Froggy, Hop, Wiggle, and all the ridiculous little dancers danced to it. And he despised playing the Froggy, Hop, Wiggle. But he also remembered how much money he was getting. And he also remembered that next year they might want him back again if he played the Froggy, Hop, Wiggle. So he spent the whole afternoon doing that and feeling very sad and feeling very divided because he wasn't getting natural pleasure within himself. He wasn't playing, you're following this, aren't you? He wasn't playing his own music. He went home that night when the state fair and the dancing was over. He went home that night with an awful lot of money. And he got lots of phone calls for more engagements to play around the state and out of the state. And he got his name written up in the paper. And he was so delighted with his fame. And Nashville called him to do an album. And he was very, very sad and very, very sick inwardly. And he began to sense what he had done wrong. And you were following this too, aren't you? They'd played music that wasn't natural to him. So next year came, and he remembered the wrong thing. He remembered all the money and all the fame and all the girls who rushed up to him for their autograph books. And so he played the Froggy, Hop, Wiggle again all afternoon long. And went home sadder that year. 2 or 3 years passed, and all the time he would play the kind of music that they demanded. But the rewards are so enormous. This is what he had worked for, to become rich and famous, and now he had it. How come I feel so strained inside instead of fulfilled? 5th year he stood up there, and someone yelled out for the Froggy, Hop, Wiggle. He said, "No." He said, "No, I'm going to play the Missouri Waltz." And they yelled back, "Froggy, Hop." And he yelled back, "Blue Danube." And they yelled out, "Froggy, Hop." And he yelled out, "Beautiful Ohio." And he stood his ground. And all afternoon he played beautiful waltzes. And he was happy playing them. And he was never, never, never asked back again. And he said, "At last I found the secret of real happiness. To play the kind of music that I want to play and not subject myself to the demands of Froggy Hoppers." Point clear? Anything that is unnatural to us has to be unhappy. Now I'll tell you that there is a certain distinction that you have to make in your life, which is this. You have to begin to see the difference between natural pleasure and unnatural pleasure. And unnatural pleasure is quite available, quite obvious for you to see if you want to be true. What is it? Name it. You want to have a mere idea that someone else can do your inner work for you, that's a very unnatural pleasure because it isn't true. And I could say all the obvious things, which I will. The unnatural pleasures of someone telling you how nice you are, how valuable you are, how much they need you. The unnatural pleasure of fawning before other people, of giving them things, trying to buy their friendship, for example. You go home tonight and you make a list and put at the top of it unnatural pleasures, and make a long as list as you can. An excitement you get, gentlemen, when a pretty woman smiles at you. The unnatural pleasure of that. You're living off of that little smile she gave you, or the flattery, and you hope that more will come of it. Don't you see how you have wrongly attached yourself to a mere idea of future bliss? And if it isn't now, it's never going to be. And you see all these false rewards that you're looking forward to. And even if you get the thrillism of it, you're going to feel divided, just like the musician did. On the other side of the page, you'll only have to put one thing. Be who I really am, which is the same thing as saying, you're going to play your own music. Do you understand that within human personality, within inside of every human personality, you're a girl and you're a boy, you're a certain age, you're younger or older, or you're a certain occupation, or you're of a certain race. You understand that inside that, those outer differences, every human being yearns for the same thing, which is simply to be one with himself. That's what it means to play your own music. To not yield to the demands of society, not yield to the demands, the wrong demands of your own inner nature, which in the case of the musician said, look at what I'm getting out of it. Look the more I'll get if I do what they want me to do, if I play their kind of music instead of my own. But you say, and a lot of people will make the following mistake. They'll say, look, this is a very highly competitive world. I want to pile up just as much money as I can, so I'll always have a resource in case something goes wrong with the economics. Do you know what you just said when you say that? Do you know that you don't believe in truth at all when you make a remark like, we talked recently about being taken care of? Do you want this world to take care of you? Is that why you yield to their demands for that sick kind of music? Because you think that they can take care of you? They can't take care of themselves. No one out on that grass ground, 500, 1,000 dancers on there, every one of them demanding that you conform to what they want. Don't you know that they can't take care of themselves? So your very belief that if you conform to them, if you yield to them, your belief that if you go along with them is false to begin with. And they'll turn on you, and the first demand will turn into 10 demands, then into 20, and you have sold your soul. I'm telling you, all the thoughts you have about security, all the thoughts you have and all the belief you have that you must yield yourself to their demands out there, all these are mere thoughts, and they're false thoughts at that. And when you can see your own mind ready to yield in order to get something from someone out there, if you can watch the movement of your own mind and see that it is shakily ready to compromise, can you then remember what you're told here? Can you begin to understand that you do have something that's very immortal? You have something that is always at peace with itself. It has nothing to do. It has nothing in common with those demands. It's so simple and so difficult for us to see that you don't have to yield to the angry, subtle, promising, or whatever demands of the outer world. What do you care as long as you have just enough money to keep the roof over your head and enough to eat? That's all that's required of the physical body. Where are you living? If you're living in time, then you're going to be a victim of it. And you're going to look forward to next year when you can compromise again and get more famous and get more money. And all the time you will be driving yourself mad. The next time someone yells at you, and I know you're following the illustration so you can parallel it with your own life. The next time when someone yells out the Froggy Hop Wiggle music, you say, no, I want peace, peace of mind. Because I found out, sir or madam, you're saying, I found out that the only thing I can get by yielding to what you want me to do, the only thing I can get is sicker. Now there it is. Why do you have to think any further than that? I'll tell you why you'll have to think further than that. Because the degeneration into greater darkness, into increasing sickness, the degeneration into that is a love of the false. And this love of the false will grow stronger and stronger, so to the point comes where you no longer are able to come to a class like this and recognize what you're doing against yourself. So it is essential to study that too. And if you study it long enough and hard enough, you'll find out that God, truth, has given you the possibility of living your own life, of playing your own music, doing what you really want to do instead of what other people want to do with their fraudulent promises. You are so gullible. You still believe in them. You believe that the government has something to give you, that that religious group has something to give you. Why don't you belong to your own organization inwardly? Isn't this a beautiful phrase, what I'm going to say next? Listen to it. Belong to yourself. Wouldn't that be nice? How many different people and how many different organizations and how many different thoughts do you belong to? If there are 100, then you're divided into 100 parts. If there are 200, then you're divided into 200 parts. And they'll all nag you and scream at you, each one of them demanding that you conform to them for their security's sake. And the very fact that they are shaky, why should you please a shaky person? He's trying to use you, you understand. Let me tell you something about that platform at the end of the grass dancing room, hall, ground. Let me tell you about something about that platform. It has steps downward from it. And when all those 500 people are screaming at you to play the music they demand, you can hear what they say, and you can fold up your accordion and walk down the steps and walk off the grounds and go home. And when you're home, you can play your own music for your own pleasure. Presently, you don't know what to do with yourself in life. You don't know what to do during your day because there are all these compromisers inside of you that says, which neurosis in me or which demand in that person out there must I please today? You don't even know who you should try to please, which one of those inner or outer tyrants. And it confuses you, so you don't know what to do. But you're afraid to slow down to where you see that every one of the demanders, whether in or out, are false, and that you don't have to obey any of them. And when you see that and dare not to say yes to them, but just watch their sickness. Why should you obey a sick thought or a sick human being? You tell me why. You're doing it. I ask you to tell me why. What is your equivalent of the fame and the fortune that that man first wanted, that that musician thought would fulfill him? What is your equivalent for it? A security in the family? Some security. As long as you're using anything for security, there's no security. Security is when you have no security at all, because there's no person here who says, make me secure. Then you are. Security is to be without a self that wants security. What is your equivalent? Search your mind and find out. Were you going against your own real nature are caving in to people who are screaming for you to keep them and you sick. Don't you know what those people are doing? They're all in a conspiracy. All 500 people out on that grass, the grassy grounds, all 500 of them are in a silent, invisible conspiracy with each other to keep each other sick. And they try to drag you into it as the musician. And when you don't go along, notice their hostility. Notice that they're not going to give you rewards anymore. Their kind of rewards, thank heaven, you don't have to have their kind of rewards anymore, because you see what they're doing to you. Do you want to get rid of all anxiety? Then you start remembering the story and remember what it means that you can play your own natural music. And I will tell you, I chose the waltz, of course, because it is peaceful, it's very quiet, very nice. It is sane music. And it's the closest thing I could come to that would be an example, a parallel of what we're trying to do inwardly, to have peaceful natures. You know what screaming jazz is? You know what it is that blasts the ear, that makes you nervous? If that's your present state, then you're obeying the neurotic cries of the people out there on the grassy ground. You're listening to them, and you think you have to obey. I am telling you, you don't have to obey, because there are steps off that platform, and all you have to do is walk down those steps and go home and stay home. Never, never, never go back. Now you'll be happy. And now you'll know what to do with yourself every second of your life, because it will be in connection with the rest of life. You have things to do physically, of course. You have to go to the store, you have to mow the lawn or whatever. You have all these things to do, and you have things to do with your mind. But that's no problem, because you've got rid of the problem by getting rid of all the false ideas in your mind, and all you have is practical thought. Now you're one with God who put you here on earth. Do you think that He would desert you? He won't desert you, but maybe you have deserted God and the possibilities that you have of drawing back to Him by changing your nature, by listening to someone else other than the mad dancers. I'll conclude with one point, which is this. Nothing except your own false fear prevents you from folding up your accordion, walking to the edge of the platform, walking down the steps, and going home. You're afraid, you see, of what's going to happen to you if you do that, because you know in your heart that you're not going to get the rewards of society anymore, of the dancers. You're not going to be asked back at that fabulous salary for the afternoon. You're not going to get the demands from autographs from the pretty girls. You're not going to get phone calls from governors saying, please come and be a featured soloist. Why don't you give all that up and see what happens to you? It will be such a beautiful experience if you do that. Remember everything you've said and put it into practice. There was once two very clever charlatans. And these charlatans spent their days and years going around deceiving people. And they succeeded quite well, because not only were they clever charlatans, but they were magicians. And they knew how to perform magic tricks that people thought were supernatural and awed people and could influence them, and they could get what they wanted from people by their combination of cunningness and magic tricks. And one day they heard of a very remote city way back in the Brazilian jungle, which had barely had contact with the outer world. And they spoke their own little dialect and language back in the jungle and didn't know any other language around the world. So these charlatans heard about it. And they heard about it especially because they heard that it was a very wealthy city. Just a group of few thousand natives back in the jungle, but very wealthy because there was gold and precious stones all in the area which they collected. So they said to themselves, just made to order for us. So we'll go back there and deceive them and get all their gold. So they traveled up the Amazon, went back, packed into the jungle, finally came to the city. And knowing all the tricks of theatricalism, they had with them various costumes and magic tricks ready for instant display. So even when they walked into the village, the whole population looked at them with their robes and with their various effects of lighting and magic. And they immediately fell down and worshipped the two men as gods. And they knew that they had succeeded exactly as they wanted to, because the people fell down and thought that they were from another world. And so the plundering began, all under the disguise of being helpful, kindly, of coming down from another world to inspire them in their lives. For example, every once in a while, once a week, say, they'd hold big public ceremonies, which all thousands of people were out in the great courtyard. And the two charlatans would stand up on the top of the steps and perform magic tricks and give chants and talk to the audience in the English language. And of course, since no one knew what they were talking about, they didn't know what they're talking about. So this went on for several weeks, and the men were getting richer and richer, and they were taking the gold and the diamonds and the emeralds and stashing them out at the edge of the jungle along the trail back, so that when they were ready to loot and flee, they could just pick up their riches and go on back to civilization. This went on for a while, but there was one man in the village who began to get a little suspicious about what was going on. But he didn't know what to do about it. He had no proof that they were charlatans. He didn't understand how he could proceed, but he felt inwardly that there was something wrong. Finally hit on the idea of their language. Now, when they stood up there in their public ceremonies, their arms outstretched like that, and making chants and talking to each other, then talking to the audience and singing sometimes to music, he thought he had better investigate that. But how could he do it when he didn't know the English language? All he knew was his own native tongue. But he finally got a hold of a book of English. So over many, many months of long, hard work, he began to understand the English language. And he would sit out there with thousands of other people listening to the charlatans pretending they were gods, and he'd listen to the words, and every once in a while he'd understand a word. He'd go back and study the book some more, and he'd understand 3 words. Then he'd go back and study the book. Finally he understood something astonishing, and he couldn't believe that they could have been so stupid. And what they were doing when they were up in front of the crowd, when they were chanting, and when they were singing, they were actually ridiculing everyone in the village for being gullible. They were talking about them and actually laughing about them in public, but of course no one understood the language, so they didn't know what was going on. But he saw what was going on. He heard what was going on. But he didn't want to be hasty about it, so he went back and consulted his book. Finally, one day, he understood every word they said, in which they were apparently leading a devotional service of some kind for the sake of the natives' spirits. They were actually laughing at them, talking about how much gold they were going to have when they finally got out there. And they were all doing it, of course, with straight faces, trying to appear religious, trying to appear as if they were spiritual beings from another world. He saw through them. So one day, he stood up right after they had left the platform, and he even held up the book, and he said, "I understand what these men are talking about. They're charlatans. Let's get our riches back and send them back to civilization where they belong." And as he exposed the charlatans, a funny thing happened. He was stoned by the population in front of him. Don't you dare take away our gods, these kindly, helpful men. Don't you dare criticize the people we've depended upon to lead us into a better life. That native did one thing. He took 2 or 3 other people and got out of that village fast. point. The charlatans are all over. They're in religion. They're in every form of organization. And if you don't begin to understand their real language, what they're talking about, you're going to give them your gold. And you know what your gold is in this instance? It's your life, man. It's your life, woman. You're giving them your life. Don't you dare give them one more second of it. You'll never understand what I'm talking about until you understand the deceit of your own nature first. When you see how the con man is in you, the charlatan with all your magic tricks, the magic tricks of sex, of a charming personality, of money, when you first see in yourself that you're doing the same thing to other people, trying to get their gold away from them, then you'll see it in other people, and they'll never be able to fool you again. But don't expect anyone to want to join you in it. They have their gods, they have their so-called securities, and they're not going to listen to you. I think the point is clear, isn't it? All right. Let me ask you and the rest of you a question. Now listen to it. Can fear of anything be a right state?
No.
All right. I'm afraid of identifying. And you were asked by Jim, who are you talking about? You're afraid of being identified with this group. Who are you talking about? You're talking about a certain little self-protective Anne that's inside you that loves to say, I don't want to be identified with this group. I want to be free. That's a man in the prison talking about the beautiful fields outside as if he lives out there. Well, we have to go on. You're on.
2 comments. The first one is that if there's a cult, it's the world.
The world is the cult.
That's right.
That's
okay.
good.
And the second thing is that it's been 1 year since I've been coming here, and when I first came, Leland was one of the first people to come up and talk to me. I appreciated his coming up and talk to me, but it wasn't until the business meeting a month ago that I understood exactly what Leland's purpose is in this group, and that is to show me the part of me that's afraid of everything.
Yeah, you could use Leland. Leland always surveys new people to come in to see if he can pull them over to his side. Every new person, Leland sits over in the corner and he looks at them. And then if he sees that they're like him, he'll try to drag them into his side. And that's a good experience to go through. And if you start to get caught in by Leland and you stay here, you'll get free of him, and that's great advancement. Oh, so many hands. Richard?
I knew that when
we all love to attack Leland. Go ahead. Go ahead, Richard. Bye-bye.
I knew that when Ann made that statement, that Leland would, I knew exactly what Leland would say when it came later on.
Of course. Gene?
I think Ann and Jean should watch their false ego gratification by all this.
Did you want to say something, Leland?
No, I was just going to say to Richard, yes, Leland also knew what he was going to say.
Okay. Phyllis?
I'd like to make a comment, may I?
Please.
There is a danger in identifying with any group, with any split, with any schism out there. But the moment that one finds a real spiritual teacher, then one has to surrender the ego, surrender the false personality, the false self, to the teacher with the capital T, and then the Spirit of God that flows through him. That's the process that happens in this class. We're not giving up anything because we are nothing.
Okay. To Nancy.
Well, is embarrassment pretty much the same as shame?
No, it isn't at all. Embarrassment, to talk about it specifically, simply means that you have seen the fall of a picture off the wall. You have a picture on the wall that you display for everyone to see, the self-picture of how nice you are and how peaceful you are, how intelligent you are, and an incident or a person comes along and doesn't believe in that picture up there and knocks it down. And since the picture represents you, your life as you erroneously and wrongly see it, since that represents you, when the picture falls off and clumps down on the ground, you feel the jolt. And again, that is wrong, but since you take yourself as being that pretty picture, and it flops. You get shattered, you get bumped. That's what embarrassment is. And it's also just pure self-torment. You're so nervously looking around the world, looking at people look at you, wondering if they like you in the first place, and if they do, whether they're going to change their opinion and dislike you. Everything centers around your own mind, your own ideas of yourself, and therefore how others should treat you. If you would learn to treat yourself right, if you could understand what that means, just a beginning understanding of it, there wouldn't be any more embarrassment over anything. And I mean it. You wouldn't be embarrassed at all. You would be too mature, too understanding to go into false kind of embarrassment, shame, and there's synonyms for that word. You wouldn't go into that at all because you understand that embarrassment is a breaking down. And when you're a real adult, emotionally and every other way, when you're a real adult, you can't get caught out of a role because you're not playing one. And if you spill your coffee while walking across the room and you look around nervously and giggle a little bit, oh, I'm so clumsy, that is a loss of control. Why do you do that? You do it because it's been your habit all your life to do some little have some little physical mishap, and then judge yourself for it, call yourself clumsy, as if you weren't all the time anyway. But that isn't the point. When you spill your coffee, I told you before, take a rag and clean it up a little bit on the floor there and go about your business. I want all of you from now on to remain solemn in every crisis. You know what it means to be solemn? All right, let's find out. To be solemn means to not be giggly. To not nervously look around and see whether someone noticed your great shame of spilling the coffee on the rug. You can be quite aware that you spilled it and everyone else in the room is looking at you. And you can just take your rag and clean up a little spot of coffee and go about your business. Why do you so yearn for distraction, for being the center of attention, that you attract it even more by behaving wrongly? You know, a mature person, if he was to spill his coffee, and there are certain accidents that could happen, the earthquake could come. And you could spill your coffee. And you just remain poised and you walk on your way. Because there's nothing in you that says, make the most of this. This world that you live in, talking about spilling coffee, they'll spill the whole world upside down just to get attention back on themselves. And even your embarrassment over making some little mistake gives you a self-thrill, a wrong thrill, a painful thrill that you both love and you hate. You love it because there you are, the clumsy person. And you hate it because it's quite natural to not like to suffer. It is natural to not like to suffer. This is a pretty unnatural world when it comes to pain and comes to suffering. It is welcomed. As a matter of fact, all forms of suffering are welcomed by an unwell mind, are welcomed by it, because then it can revolve around that persecution, revolve around that loss, and wail and cry and say, I exist. You don't. All that exists is a neurotic movement, your physical self, your mental self, your emotional self. All that happens is that something is happening that you take as being you, and it's not you at all. Therefore, I again instruct you to stay solemn. You ladies, you men do the same thing in your own way. But I'll talk to you ladies for a minute. You are instructed not to break down and giggle foolishly and lose control of yourself, and some little mishap that you call an embarrassing situation. You're to remain poised. You're to know that it happened. Of course it happened, that you stumbled a little bit and fell down or whatever. Of course you know that it happened. But you are not to let anyone's looking at you or their attitudes toward you. You're not to let anything inside of you steal away your poise. And that will, by the way, reduce accidents 95%. Not 100%, because the other 5% belong to earthquakes that are outside of your control. But the things that happen inside of you, 95% of them have caused that accident to happen, that embarrassment that followed it too. Embarrassment is a small fire, is it not? You like burning yourself in a small way. You stop being so self-centered that you're ashamed of yourself all the time. You walk through this world, don't you look left and don't you look right. You look straight ahead and you walk right through this world. I don't care who it is. I don't care who you see up in front of you and on the left and on the right and right in front of you blocking your path. You walk forward and you will walk and no one will be able to stop you. Now you're a long, long ways from even beginning to understand what I've talked about so far. But I've given you the theory. I've given you the principles of it. And I want you to know how weak you are, how you have no self-reliance at all. You start seeing the full extent of the lesson you had years ago called instant recovery. Don't you dare let anyone frighten you, embarrass you, intimidate you. Don't you dare go down under their glare, under their words, under their scoffing. I tell you to stop it because you don't have to continue with it. And all this is going on internally inside of you. You don't show it outside so much when you're embarrassed. Look, you meet someone outside at the rummage sale that we're having right now. You meet someone outside and you meet at a table and you don't know what to talk about. And so you make up something to talk about. Well, look at the price of that table. It's $50. I think that's a little high, or maybe it's a little lower, whatever. Why do you invent a conversation in order to get rid of your nervousness? Why don't you just stand there and enjoy yourself? Who put you into wrong relationship with that other person who came up and started talking or remained silent? What has that other person got to do with you being poised inwardly? Then if the other person says something, you can reply, oh, I guess maybe it's a little overpriced or a little underpriced. There's nothing wrong with that kind of talk. You're just talking. And besides, you know that there's a secret message in back of two people standing at a table for sale and just talking about it? Unfortunately, most of the message is wrong, and I'll tell you what it is. Both of them are standing there, and because they're so scared of life and uncertain, they just are yearning to have that other person standing there and have this little light conversation with them, which they say is a form of acceptance. Because you know how badly you have been treated, and you have, by bad people, all your life as children, for example. And you get so mixed up and so hungry for someone just to say a kind word to you that you'll stand there and have a nice little light conversation with them about nothing in particular. Just so you can say, well, at least this time I didn't get hit. We're going deeper than that. You watch your discomfort when in the company of anyone or in any situation, and that is a form of embarrassment. And the reason it exists is because you are not really there. What is there instead? The mechanical imposter that has a certain set of rules that says, when I meet Bill, I behave this way and talk that way. And when I meet Mary, I know Mary, and Mary knows me, I talk with her a certain way. But when you meet William, a stranger, all your little phonograph record rolls, breaks down, and you don't know how to talk to William, and so you go into embarrassment. If you could understand that you are talking from a phonograph record with those other two people and with everyone else, you could begin to understand what it means when you're in any situation, what you call an embarrassing situation, where you don't put on the phonograph record of the giggle or the remark, I'm so clumsy, or the guilt that maybe you've stained the rug permanently with your coffee and someone will get mad at you for that and you'll get bawled out. We're always so afraid of getting bawled out, aren't we? So you can see that you go into your usual unnecessary self-protective reactions. Don't you protect, because there's nothing to protect. It's your idea that there's something to protect that brings up the protective remark and the hurt feeling, the embarrassed feeling. We could all go through this world so easy and so free and so comfortable if we would stay wide awake and know what's happening inside all the time as well as what's happening outside. So when something outside happens over which you have no control, someone comes up and starts screaming, something unexpected happens, what has that to do with you? If you can be torn off your throne, you're not really a cosmic king or queen yet. When you're really a cosmic king, nobody can get you off that throne. They can't lure you off it. They can't knock you off it. They can't tell you you're an imposter and make you doubt yourself. You're not going to doubt yourself at all. Because you're not thinking that you're a king on the throne. You know it, but not in an egotistical sense. And what it means in a cosmic sense to be king or queen on the throne is simply to be in possession of yourself at all times. I said, to be in possession of yourself at all times. And when you're really in possession of yourself, you know that you know. The whole world of 4 billion people can hurl accusations at you, call you a fake, call you an imposter. There's no meaning to you. And you will understand a certain phrase that I've used many times in this class, and I'll use it again. Where someone who is lost, and they get their thrills out of taunting, out of baiting people, and you can see it coming from a block away because you know human nature, and you know how they have to feed off of the world. And you might say to them, you might even say it out loud sometimes under certain circumstances, you might say to them, you're wasting your time. And the reason you say that, because you know it from yourself, from your own essence. You know that everybody who tries to take you off the throne, to lure you off it, or come up and knock you off it with insults, they're wasting their time. You know where you belong. And where you belong is in possession of yourself at all times. There's no outside power. In reality, you understand, there's no outside power that can drag you off. Because you know you've been dragged off so much. You've been dragged off so much before that you began to see that that's the painful way of life. You don't want the pain anymore. You want to remain in charge of yourself, so that the whole world is wasting its time trying to injure you in any way at all. And I will tell you, you've got a lot of inner work to do to see how worries, how feelings of doom, of getting caught. How do you like that one? You like that one? How you feel that you're going to get caught? I'll make it better yet. How you feel that you're going to get found out? Why don't you get found out? Why are you hiding anything? Why don't you find yourself out? Go ahead, look. If you haven't found yourself out, you are indeed going to be very frightened of other people, that they're going to see through you. You tell me what's wrong with them seeing through you? Nothing wrong with them seeing through you. I'm not talking about, and I always add this because some of you don't understand very much, I'm not talking about giving away your personal private life. Don't you dare let other people feed on that. You push them away and you let them know by your manner, you stay out of my private life. They're feeding off of that. They're so sick. They have nothing worthwhile in their own life, so they have to pry into yours. Don't you dare let anyone poke into your life in any way at all. But we're not talking about that particular subject. You stay so clear, so alert, so awake. Nobody can touch you, no matter where you go or what you do. Even if you're in a position that the whole world would find embarrassing, it's nothing to you. Your mind stays clear. You know where you belong. You belong on the cosmic throne. All right, we'll continue. The purpose of a spiritual story is to talk about the visible in order to explain the invisible. The purpose of an illustration, a parable, is to talk to you in terms that you can understand. You can understand an apple or a barn or a sky, visible things. You can understand those, and then when the illustrative story is over, say, what the man talked about was more or less a rough parallel of the spiritual world. I can understand the physical, the horse or the automobile or the rug, and the purpose in bringing those objects up is to help me understand what I can't see with my physical eyes, and which I'm trying to see with my spiritual eyes. The story you're about to hear will do just that. There is a great lesson behind it. And it's up to you as I go along to try to see the lesson. And I know sometimes you may be ahead of me, perhaps even in the story, but you stay with me so as you can see the depths and the point of the story. There was once a group of pioneers who came to a new country, and they found it to be a very dreadful, stormy place. It was a country of heavy, dark clouds, rain clouds. And it was a stormy land with rain and thunder and lightning. But they had to live there. They couldn't find anywhere else to go, so they were stuck with it. So they tried to make the most of it by each newcomer to the land setting off a certain number of acres, farms, allotting a certain number for each, so that dozens and scores of miles were covered by each newcomer farmer having his own land to work. So they settled down in this very dark, rainy country, and they plowed the fields and they planted the seeds. And it was very, very difficult because it rained practically all the time. It was a rainy country. And they were knee deep in the mud half the time. And of course this made them very discouraged and bitter. They wondered if they were ever going to make it. And they barely did. Over a long period of time, many years, they just barely grew enough fruits and vegetables to take care of themselves. On for many, many years, and they were obviously very unhappy people, very insecure people. Not knowing anything better and not knowing any place else to go, they worked hard all day and thrashed about all night because they knew that the next day was going to be just as hard as the previous one. This went on for a long, long time. Finally, one day, a half a dozen of the farmers met at a crossroads where they stopped to talk about crop production, how to improve it. And while they were standing there talking, one of them looked up to the sky and was astonished at what he saw. And he didn't call attention to the others yet because he wasn't quite sure whether he's seeing yet or not, seeing correctly or not. So out of the corner of his eye, while he was talking with the others, he looked up And at quite a distance, several miles, he saw some light coming down from the clouds that was very unusual, that wasn't habitual with the country they were living in. So he called their attention to it. He said, look up there, what is that? And they casually looked around. They looked several miles up in the clouds, and what they saw, which was now very clear to them, was an enormous break in the dark clouds, a mile wide, a mile across, in which the sun, the nice, warm, bright sun, was coming down through this break in the clouds and shining on down, of course, on down to the ground. And the difference between the dark and the light was so obvious, they just stared at it for a while. They couldn't believe it. But they said, oh, well, it's a quirk of nature, and surely it'll pass. So they went back to discussing their day's work. But out of the corner of their eyes, they kept watching that. And their curiosity grew because it didn't go away. It stayed that way all the time. They couldn't stand it anymore, so they hurried on over, got in their cars, and drove on over to where it was, and they got right in front of it, and their astonishment was complete. Sure enough, here was this break in the clouds with a nice warm sunshine coming down, and in the center of it was the home, the ranch home, of one of their fellow members, one of the other pioneers. And his entire land, from fence over to the west, the fence over to the east, from north to south, his entire property was circled right in this light. Nothing but light and sunshine on his property, and on his alone. Because when you got to his fences, the darkness and the mist began again. They were certain that this had to be a miracle of some kind. What is this that's going on? They stood there and looked at it and couldn't believe what they saw. But they finally had to believe it, because there it was. This great square of light coming down, and completely around it, the darkness which their own homes and fields were in. And they knew the man who lived in that home. He was one of them. His name was Gerald, let's say. Said, we better call on Gerald and find out what's going on here. So 6 of them went up to the door. Gerald saw them coming. He waved at them. Hi, boys. And they had a friendly little talk. And they stared at Gerald, and Gerald knew what they wanted to ask. And finally they asked. They said, we can't even formulate words for this, but what on earth or what on heaven is going on here? You've been singled out for some kind of a rare blessing. We don't understand it. We're in darkness and you're in light. And he said, do you really want an answer? They said, of course we want an answer. He said, it's extremely difficult to understand, but I'll tell you if you're really interested. But it's getting on in the day now, and we have certain things to do. Why don't you all come over tomorrow and bring as many people as you want, and I'll explain the whole story to you. I can give you a perfect explanation for it. Very difficult one. You won't grasp it, but I can give it to you. So that's fine. So the next day, they all came over, and they all gathered in his front yard, and they sat on the grass, and he stood up in front, and he gave the following explanation. As you know, when I came into this very poor country with you, I joined in with you in doing all this hard work of fighting the rain and the wet soil, and I worked hard and long, just as you did, as we all did, getting nowhere. Until I began to think about something that I'd never ever thought about before. And what I thought about at the start was whether it had to continue this way or not. This is the way it's always been, but my mind formed a little question mark in it that said, does it have to continue always to be the way it is? And so I began to look into the question itself. I didn't know the answer. You know, we've all been here many, many years, and that's how long I've been studying this thing. And to not drag it out too much, ladies and gentlemen, I finally came across a certain phrase that had great meaning to me, and that began to unravel the whole mystery of why you were in darkness over there, and I was, and why it seemed to have to stay that way. And I solved the mystery. And here it is briefly, and then, if you want to ask me questions, you can do so. The phrase that came to my mind was of just two words, and that phrase was mental matching. Mental matching. Now, you may find this difficult to believe, gentlemen, but you asked me, and I'm going to tell you what happened. Call this a miracle. It most certainly is. I discovered, to my own great amazement, that my personal inner nature created the exterior conditions I encountered, including the weather. I could see this mental matching from the very start when I studied two things. I studied the weather, the sky, the clouds, the rain, the thunder and lightning. I studied them, and I could see exactly when I described the dark, miserable sky up there, that when I described that, I was also equally, exactly describing my inner nature. I tell you, gentlemen, I was a very angry man, a very bitter man, a very irritable man. I hated the conditions I was in. And I blamed everyone. I blamed God and man for putting me in this condition where I had to work so hard and get so little results. And to feel trapped, to feel at the mercy of clouds. Here I am, a man, and I'm at the mercy of clouds. I had all this violence in me. Maybe you didn't know about it, but I knew about it. And I discovered that there's a great law of the universe. You can leave religion, the word religion, out of it, gentlemen, if you want. You can leave the word philosophy out of it. I tell you, I discovered a law that said the outer condition will match your inner condition. That is true. I saw it. I explained it to you. I was dark. I was cruel. That matched what happened up there. Those cruel rains. I'd get some seeds planted and a flood would come down and wash them away. That's pretty cruel. But I'm cruel too. Even when I hated what happened, that's cruel. It's cruel to me. Now, gentlemen, I am not giving you a sermon, please. I'm explaining to you what happened and what I discovered. And I discovered, first of all, that for me to be in a state of rebellion, of violence, of negativity against anything, including the weather, was wrong for me. It is wrong to have a dark spirit. Of course it is. I didn't know. Gentlemen, I didn't know that for half my life. I really didn't know it, that it's wrong for me to be dark, for me to be gloomy, for me to be violent, for me to complain, for me to lash out. I didn't know it was wrong. I studied. I know it's wrong for me because when you are dark in your nature, you're miserable. And it's wrong to be miserable because it's unnecessary. And gentlemen, as I understood more and more and more, as I saw that it wasn't at all needful for me to get mad at anything, that's what I had to see first, that I was wrong and I had to change that to being right by seeing the folly of it, the folly of screaming at my children, at my wife, of being mad all the time, of complaining, of accusing. I saw that was wrong for me. And when I saw it was wrong for me, the mental matching began to change. As I changed my inner nature, gentlemen, the exterior conditions began to change. You know, as it first happened, you weren't watching this because you live at a distance from here, but I was very careful. I was watching my exterior conditions. And for the first time, about 2 years ago, I went outside and I saw that I was in a very authentically composed condition, that I wasn't falling into gloom over what had happened to my potato crop. As I went out there and I knew that I was in command of myself, that I was in a light, as a matter of fact, enjoyable spirit. When I was in an enjoyable spirit inside, I saw the positive mental matching. And as I stood there knowing that I had light inside me, I could also physically look down at the ground and see that it was getting lighter. And I could look over toward the fence, toward where my property ended, and I could look over the fence and see that it remained dark over there. But in where I was, it was starting to get light. Now, what causes light? What causes the ground to get light? What causes the ground to get light is the light that's coming from up there. And I looked up, and I could see just the little bit of light beginning to break through the dark clouds. They weren't as dark as they used to be. There was darkness way off in the miles in any other direction. But right above my home, I could see it getting lighter and lighter. And I knew that what I'd stumbled upon after all these years of hard work was a tremendous scientific, or if you want to call it, a great spiritual law, which is that if I change me, I will change my outer conditions, because they always must match. They always must match. Oh, the task then became so simple. Well, not quite that simple, because I had a long ways to go yet. I had a lot of hidden dark places in me that I knew would be matched up there. But I didn't do it for the reward of a better potato crop or for more warmth or more sunshine. I did it for the reward of being on earth for the purpose that I am on earth for. Then, as a very natural result of that, the potato crop became better and the apples became larger and shinier. And as you can see, gentlemen, all the green is greener and the purple is purpler. Everything is brighter because, not because I caused it, but because I yielded to something that was much higher up there than my own nature. All right, gentlemen, there it is. You wish to ask questions? You want to ask me anything in particular about it? And they asked 2 or 3 questions, but they were too stunned to stick with it. It was too much, far too much. So they went home, and each went to his own home and the men talked to their wives, and wives talked to their husbands, and they all had different reactions to it. Some of them were just too puzzled to say anything but mutter a little bit about it. And others even accused him of being a black magician of some kind. What kind of a man is this that he can change his nature and cause exterior things to happen? But one thing they failed to do, which is to say, well, that's a pretty real thing out there. That no one can deny the warmth and the brightness of that sun coming down. Something caused it. We're living in a world which is presented to you tonight, right here in this room. Presented to you a certain principle called mental matching, in which you can investigate yourself why you get into trouble out there. Why you have all these wrong human relations, and why you have all these wrong personal relations right within your own mind, the madhouse up there. You can see because you have chosen that without questioning it, without seeing whether there's a possibility of there being something else. I'm telling you that there is something else for you. Most people are not going to listen to a story like this and say, all right, if he did it, maybe I can do it. But if you take that attitude, that's perfectly fine. If he did it, Maybe I can do it. Or do you love crabbing about your crops, about your poor results in your life? Do you prefer to feel sorry for yourself? Something is going to have to shock you people awake so that you don't hear a talk like this and disassociate it from your life. It is possible for you to go out someday, to continue illustration a little bit, to go outside your house and repeat the experience of the farmer, where you're out in the social world somewhere, you're gathered at a holiday dinner with your relatives, and you're seeing a different kind of a person in operation that you used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You remember how it was a few years ago when you went to your relative's home, and there was these 15 or 20 brothers and sisters and parents and cousins and grandparents and children around the table, around that holiday table. And if you were observant of your own attitudes toward them, you could go right around the table, look at every one of them, and find something wrong with them in that they displeased you. And you even get a great enjoyment out of criticizing them. Well, I remember the time that he did that. I know that brother of mine over there is a thief. Or I once saw that respectable-looking uncle over there. I once saw him get roaring drunk and scream out and run out around the street. I know all those things about those people. When you really work with a law of mental matching and you go back there, you look around, and because there is light in you now, instead of darkness that wants more darkness, instead of making critical remarks, instead of bragging about yourself, instead of hating one who's more successful, instead of hating that big bruiser of an uncle who dominates everything, he talks the loudest, and he looks at you and makes some little sharp remark. Instead of you being afraid of him, because the light is in you. The light that is in you is the light that's in that room because they're the very same thing. And what you do in light is to see. Isn't that what happens in light? You see clearly. What happens in darkness? You try walking outside here with all that furniture outside in complete darkness and you're going to stumble. You don't know how to handle it. And you're scared and you not fall down and get hurt. The purpose of light is to see, and when you see, because of the light, you don't stumble and you don't get hurt, and that's all there is to it. Then you can go to the relative's house or not, as you wish. Maybe you don't want to go there. That's up to you. Maybe you'd rather stay home. Maybe you'd rather stay home now, because you found such a real pleasure, a permanent pleasure, in just living in the light. Living with yourself, not in vanity. You don't think about it. It's there. You don't have to think about it, thank heaven. The light is there. We're sitting in this lighted room. We don't have to think about the electricity. It's just there. It's coming from a source outside us. It's reliable. It'll be there tomorrow when we want it. That's what it is with inner light. It is just there, and you don't have to do a thing but to stay with it. Stay within it all the time. Can you think of what might be going on inside of you in your daily events that is causing a darkness and which therefore causes the stumbling and the bumping and the falling down? Can you see what it is? Can you see a timidity? Can you see where you're afraid of someone else in this room? Can you see that? Can you name someone, don't do it now please, but can you name someone in this room that you're afraid of? Can you see someone else in this room that you have contempt for? Can you see someone else in this room that you have some kind of a wrong attitude, which by the way, is a chain between you and that other person, and you're tied to him. You're tied to her. How are you going to walk freely when you have a chain? You can walk 10, 20, 1,000 miles away from that other person, but that invisible psychological chain keeps you tied to him or her, and it's just the same as if you're in the same room with him or with her. In the light, you know how to look at the lock and the chains that are around you. It's no problem at all. In the light, you see it, you've got the key. You've always had the key with you, by the way, and you lock it. That's all there is to it. The chains fall off. But if you're in the dark and try to get them off, you'll never get them off. You'll be fumbling. In the first place, you'll be fumbling around on the ground for the key. You won't be able to find it. You'll be cursing. Who's hiding this key from me? And if you even find the key a little bit, it won't fit. And all the time you're cursing. Have you ever noticed that you are? You don't like that word very well, do you? I'm telling you that you're cursing. Because you have a cursing spirit. All dark spirits are cursing, and they are curses. And guess then who gets cursed. Think of the phrase self-cursing if you want to know why you hurt so much, why you're in so much pain. Once you get the chains off in the light, they are off permanently. They are off forever. They can never be reformed again. They can never come back. You're walking in the light. All right, so you make a study. You make a study of where you're having trouble out there with that man, with that woman, with that employment, with that social situation. You find out where you're having a problem with it, and I will guarantee you that there'll be a mental equivalent inside you where you are as dark as that hostile person that you're in association with and whom you fear and hate. It is in you. When you're standing in the light, when the farmer was standing in the light coming down through the clouds, he could stand right in the middle of it and see the darkness all around him, but it was not a part of his life. When you're in the light, you understand darkness completely. You've been in it all your life and you know what it is, but now you can compare. Now you're right in the light. And you know that as long as you stay right where you belong, in your own place, in your own essence, if you stay right there, how can the darkness touch you? You know everything that's going on in your own business. And I'm talking about practical things, too, out in the world. You'll know why prices go up and down. Because human nature is mad, for example. You'll understand everything and be affected by nothing. Because how can darkness touch light? Stay in the light and you'll know the answers to everything. You will be, in one sense, the answers. And life becomes so easy, so effortless. Let the darkness rage around you all at once. Let the storm rage up in the clouds over there 10 miles away. You're at peace because you are where you belong, at home. A hiker was once hiking over hill and dale, and he finally came to a mountain ridge. And he hiked along to the end of the ridge, and there on one side of it was a small little country, and on the other side of it was another small country. Country on the left, country on the right, down below where he was standing. And he casually observed the scene off to the left of the nation down there. And what they were doing, he saw, was fighting. There was cars racing up down the street, crashing into buildings. There were people leaning out of their windows, yelling at the man across the street. And there were crowds and mobs running through the streets with clubs. Pretty unpleasant place, but this was the nation. And he looked over to the right, and it was the exact opposite over there. Everyone is quietly going about their own business, enjoying themselves, peaceful, quiet, no hurry, very, very leisurely. And as he was standing there wondering what he had come across, he saw a man come up from the village on the right, the peaceful place. He saw a man come up there, coming up the trail, walking toward him, obviously, so he waited till he got up. And when the stranger came to the top, the hiker exchanged greetings with him, and the hiker said, I've just observed the most astonishing sight from here. Do you know what I'm talking about? And the stranger said, yes, indeed I do. I know about both these nations that you're talking about because, as a matter of fact, I live in the one on the right, the peaceful one down there. So the hiker said, well, how can two people living with only a mountain between them, how can they be living such terribly different lives? One of them tearing each other apart and the other one living very quietly and enjoying themselves. He said, well, if I tell you the names of these two nations, that might begin to give you an explanation. So I'll tell you their names. The nation on the left down there is called the Nation of 10,000 Signs. That's its name. The Nation of 10,000 Signs. The one on the right, where I live, is called the Nation of No Signs. And the hiker said, well, thank you, but I'm still confused. Maybe you could elucidate and also explain. And the stranger said, yes, I'll do both of those. In fact, I'll do better than that. I'll give you a walking tour of both of those nations and let you see for yourself why they are the way they are. So they started walking down toward the left, toward the battling nation. And as they got fairly close, the stranger said to the hiker, now, under ordinary conditions, you wouldn't want to go down there at all. You'd be in great danger just by entering the nation because, as you can see, they're very violent. They don't care who they hurt. Whoever comes in there is fair game for their hostility and their rocks. However, since you're with me, you'll be all right. As long as you stay close to me, there'll be no problem at all because I belong to this other country and I bring the nature of that country with me wherever I go. Therefore, I'm not in danger, and you won't be as long as you stick close to me. Well, the man thought that was a very interesting thought, so he walked down together. And when they got into the nation itself, what he saw from up there was nothing compared to what he saw down there. Everybody was screaming and hollering. If they weren't hitting each other with rocks or sticks, they were screaming at each other, hurting each other's feelings, insulting each other, being very vicious in every way. So that's the first thing he noticed. These people were out of control. It was like a zoo, a human zoo. In fact, he could see animal characteristics in a lot of those people. He saw baboons, he saw smiling crocodiles, he saw ostriches, he saw braying donkeys. But then he saw something else. And he understood why it was called the Nation of 10 Million Signs. Everyone walked around with a sign. There were signs on a stick that they went around walking around this place with. There were signs on the walls. The buses went by with signs on it. Top of the flagpole, instead of flag, there was a sign. And the signs all started the same way. They all started with the same two words. And those two words were, I love. And then after that, everyone had a different ending to what they loved. One man was walking down the street and his sign said, I love pancakes. The man coming toward him, his sign said, I love syrup. So they got together. But everyone loved something different. They had their own individual loves. And the stranger said, you begin to understand something now why these people are battling so much? The man said, well, it's seeping through a little bit. So the stranger said, now let's go to my country. And you can compare the two, and I think you'll understand a little better. So they went over the mountain peak, went down to the other country, the peaceful country. And that's what it was, a peaceful country. People were all smiling, really smiling contentedly and happy and relaxed, and they went about their business. farming and mechanicking, the whole thing, only they were very happy about it. And there wasn't a single sign to be seen in the whole country. They walked up and down the streets, no signs at all. So the stranger, who was no longer a stranger now, he said to the hiker, "Come sit down. Here's a sidewalk cafe. We'll talk a little bit. Because you might want to decide which country you want to stay in." As if that'd be difficult. So they sat down and talked, and the stranger explained the whole situation to him. He said, "Now, those people over there, they have their individual loves. One man loves this, but another man loves that, and so they fight because they have different loves. They're in competition because each one thinks that what he loves is the only right one, the only right religion, right? The only right way to think, the only philosophy, the only way to build a home even. They fight over there's nothing untouched over there that they quarrel about. The shape of the house, the color of the bricks they use. They fight about everything because everyone has what he calls his love and he wants to tell everyone else about it. I love red bricks and the other man loves green bricks. And so they fight over a color. Over here we have no signs at all. We have no need for them because our minds don't operate in self-proclaimed loves. We just live without the word. We live without the label. No one here, as you notice, is trying to prove a thing. Not trying to prove what he loves. Therefore, there's no opposition. In just this 5 minutes of this opening story, I've described the whole world. The whole world is on the left down there. You have your loves. You have your false needs. You have what you call your dynamic aggressions that are going to take you somewhere. Let me ask you a question, please. All of you, let me ask you a question. And those of you listening to this tape, why do you want anything but to be a peaceful, decent, quiet human being? Now you tell me. Now I'm not going to let you slip out of that. You're going to try. You've already tried. You tell me why you want to be anything but a quiet, innocent, harmless human being. Why do you want anything else but that? I'll tell you why. Because you're mixed up. Because you were lied to as children and as young adults. And you took it as a necessity that you had to go around with your signs. And they all started with the word love. I love this religion. And then the man with the other sign says, I love that religion. And so you fight.